Hello and welcome back. So we're going to build recipe and chef and the validations for them. But let's take a look real quick at how we're going to do that. Okay. And it's necessary to understand some of these. And we've seen them in our to-do app, but it's important to revisit this. So I'm going to hop on the Rails console. Control L again to get to the top. Okay. So how do we build a new recipe object? We can do something like this, recipe.new, right? Recipe.new. Now, we're going to be working with instance variables. So let's say at recipe, which is a variable, and you can call it anything. You can call this at Masroor if you want, okay? Or anything you want, equals recipe.new. Okay, if you do that, it just creates a new recipe instance variable, okay, and calls it, references it by at Masroor. And recipe is the class, obviously. So what if we want to assign it a name? We can say at Masroor.name equals new recipe, okay, at Masroor.email equals masroor@example.com. Okay, and then at masroor.created at equals time.now, etc., etc. You get the picture, right? So that's how you would go about creating a new recipe. Then you'd hit at masroor.save. Okay, now what if I have a recipe that simply goes recipe equals recipe.new name, and I'll leave it empty, and description, I'll leave it empty as well. What if I have that? Okay, I seem to have a problem. What did I do wrong? Unknown attribute description for recipe. Okay, I seem to have made a mistake. Whoops. I have called my recipe, I have called the attribute email. Okay, that's not good. I don't know when I made this mistake, so let's take a look. This will be a good exercise to correct this. So I'm gonna exit out. Let's see. What did I do here in my create recipes? Wow, name and email. So that's a problem. It should have been description, and this should have been text. Create chefs, I have chef name and email. Okay, and create recipes, for some reason I chose to go with name and email. Very interesting. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to correct the column name with a new migration and also the type. How do I do that? So let's go ahead and create a migration to handle this. So Rails generate migration, and then I'll say change underscore column in recipes. Okay, this creates a new migration file. Okay, define change. I'm going to first rename column. So rename column. I hope this works. I haven't used this in a while. Rename column. First you give it the table name. So recipes is the name of the table. Then I give it the column that I want to change. Okay, so it's going to be the email column. Let me just double check and make sure that that's what I have done. Let me see. Okay, the email column. Yep, name is fine. The email column needs to be changed. So let's do that. Email. And I'm going to rename it to description. Okay, and then I also want to change column recipes table, and I want to make description type text instead of string, because string can only hold 255 characters, and for description we might need more than that. Okay, we might need large descriptions. So let's see if this works. Gonna go with Rails DB migrate. Okay, it ran, so let's hope it worked. Let's hop on Rails console. Control L. Okay, now let's go with recipe.all. Okay, and then recipe. All right, name is string, description of type text. Perfect. All right, so see what we did there? We were able to make 2 corrections by using a new migration file. But notice another thing that I did. I didn't go back to an existing migration file that I had created and correct it there. Because here's an important thing to remember. Rails tracks each migration file that you've run. So once you hit Rails DB migrate, Rails is going to assume that that migration file has been run already. And then if you run Rails DB migrate again, even if you change the file, it's not going to rerun anything because this is going to mark it as already run. The one way to do this would be if you rolled back a migration and then updated this and then reran it. Then it would rerun the migration, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted a cleaner way of doing this, which is simply create a new migration to fix the problem. All right, that way they stay in order and they work perfectly. Okay, so that has worked. Now let's go ahead and do what we were doing, which is creating a new recipe. So at recipe equals recipe.new. If I leave name colon and then empty, and then description colon empty as well, and then if I go at recipe.save, check it out. What happened? It actually saved this to the database without a name and a description. Well, that's not a good thing, and this is precisely why we have validations. We're gonna add validations. For example, if I go back here, okay, and simply do this in my recipe model. Actually, I'll close out of the to-dos because we're not using them. Okay, in my recipe model, if I do validates name presence true, if I do that and then try to do the same thing at recipe equals recipe.new and name empty, description I'll leave out, at recipe.save, at recipe.new, name, okay, recipe.save. Looks like it still hit the database. Let's do recipe.all. Oh, whoops, this didn't take effect yet. I have to reload. All right, now let's try that again. Recipe equals recipe.new. See, the Rails console was already running and it wasn't updated with this latest update in my model. Recipe.new, and then I'll say recipe.save. Okay, see, it rolled back transaction. And why did it do that? If I go at recipe.errors.any question mark, notice how it says true. Then at recipe.errors.full messages, name can be blank. Check it out. It gives me the message. Okay. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to use an assertion to check for errors. Okay. We're going to use what's called Rails assertions when we create tests for this. Now, since I have a lot of irrelevant and incorrect data in my database right now because of these things that I just created, if I simply do recipe.delete_all, now if I do recipe.all, check it out, it's empty. Okay, so I got rid of all the incorrect data. Okay, so similarly, we can do this for chef. All right, I'm not going to show you how to do that because you saw me doing this for recipe. So I'd recommend go ahead and do this for chef as well. All right. Okay, so let's build our test. So recipes, there's my README. This is going to be at the model level. So this is going to be a model test. Okay, so scroll down to your test folder and then models right here, right click, new file, and we'll call it recipe_test.rb. All right, pull it up. First line, require, and then within quotes, test underscore helper. Okay. And as with all other Rails classes, it's going to be a class. So recipe, but this one is a test. So recipe test, okay? Camel case, subclass from active support, : test case, all camel case. All right. And within there, we're going to do a setup first. So define setup. And the setup is a key method, okay? Setup basically runs before all of your tests are run, one by one, okay? So basically whatever you give here will be run before every test. So in setup, what you do is you just simply create a recipe that you want to test. So I'm going to do recipe equals recipe.new, and then I'm going to say name. I'll give it some recipe name, vegetable, and description, I'll give it some description, great vegetable recipe. Okay? Close quote, close parentheses. All right, so that's the setup method. So now I have a recipe instance variable that I want to test. So what should be the first test? The first test should be that recipe should be valid, right? That at least I have a model and everything. At the very least, this should be valid. So we're going to use active record assertions, and you can read up on them by Googling active record assertions and then Rails guides, a guide to testing. You can scroll down and you can look at all the assertions that are available. All right, check it out. Assert equal, assert not, assert. We're going to use assert and assert not quite a lot, but there are all these other assertions that are available. Okay, so you can read up on that. So simply assert at recipe.valid ? This should pass because I have a recipe model and I'm able to connect to the database and create a recipe. So this should pass. Let's try it out. Rails test. Perfect. No failures. Everything ran. Great. Now the second test. Our second test over here, recipe, I'm going to code this out just so we can make this fail and then pass. Test should be name should be present, do, and then end. And what should this one be? So we have this recipe instance variable that's available to us, and this one has name vegetable. So if we're going to test name should be present, then let's make the name nothing, an empty string, and then let's try to save it, and it should fail. It should not be able to save, right? So at recipe.name equals empty string, and then here we're going to assert not at recipe.valid, right? Because here we want to ensure that the recipe is not valid if the name is not present, okay? And in case you're wondering, hey, by the way, this is going to hit the database, or is it going to hit the database? You don't have to worry about that because this is our test database. All our tests are run in this test.sqlite database, and it's purged after all the tests are run, okay? So it basically creates data, tests it out, and then clears it out. It does not hit development database or any other database. So there you go. Let's run this and this should fail. Rails test. Okay, it failed. And what is the error? Okay, name should be present, expected true to be nil or false, meaning it was expecting false based on this test, assert not, but it got true. Okay, so how are we going to make this pass? Simple enough. We already have the code here. Let me uncomment this. Validates name presents true. So it will no longer allow me to save without a name. Great. Now it's passing. Perfect. The next requirement, description should be present. All right. So let's go to our test. Name should be present. let's do the same thing for description. Command C, Command V. Over here, description should be present. Description empty, assert not, valid. Okay, so let's try it out. Rails test. One failure. Okay, description should be present. This one failed. Expected true to be nil or false. All right, so in my recipe, I'm simply gonna say validates description presence true. Now if I run the test, perfect, it passed. Now let's enforce some requirements on maximum and minimum length. We'll leave this chef ID one out for now because we are not working with the association just yet. Maximum length for name and description, maybe a minimum for description also. All right, so we know we are enforcing minimum at least 1, but let's say we want description to be at least 5 characters and maximum to be 500 characters. Okay, so how do we do that? We can say comma length colon open close curly brace. Whoops, actually I'm building the code first, which is not what I want to do. I want to write the test first. So how do we test for that? We should say test description shouldn't be less than 5 characters. Do. And the next one is test description shouldn't be more than 500 characters. Do. End. Okay, so how do we do this? We can simply say at recipe.description, recipe.description equals, let's take a string A and multiply it by 3. So string multiplied by 3 gives you 3 A's, A, and A. Okay, so assert not at recipe.valid. Okay, while I'm at it, I'm going to build this one too. Recipe.description equals A times 501, and then assert not at recipe.valid. Okay, so both of these should fail because both of these will be getting true because I haven't enforced this. So if I run this, check it out, expected true to be nil or false, expected true to be nil or false. Both of them failed. So let's enforce this. Over here, we can simply say length colon space open close curly brace and put in a minimum. And what did we put as minimum? Let's see. Minimum 5, right? Minimum 5. So minimum 5, comma, maximum 500. And now if I run it, Rails test. Perfect, it's passing. So we've successfully added all of the validations that we wanted at this time for our recipe model, and we built our model according to that. Great. And that's basically passing all of this except for the chef ID should be present, which we'll add later. So in the next video, we'll do the same thing for chef, which will be slightly more complicated, but nothing that we cannot manage. I'll see you in the next video.